May 13th, 1981. St. Peter's Square was packed. More than 100,000 people gathered under the Roman sun. The Pope moved through the crowd in his open vehicle, touching children, blessing rosaries, smiling at the faithful who stretched as far as the eye could see. It was 5:17 p.m. when two gunshots tore through the air. John Paul II fell. Blood soaked his white vestments. Screams replaced prayers, and the world held its breath for hours that felt like decades, not knowing whether the most beloved man on earth was still alive. What happened in the seconds that followed is one of the most disturbing and most fascinating accounts in the modern history of the Church, because that May 13th was no ordinary date. It was the exact anniversary of the Fatima apparitions, and John Paul II knew that as he was losing consciousness. To understand what happened in that square in Rome, we need to go back decades. We need to understand who Karol Wojtyła was before he became Pope, because his relationship with Fatima did not begin on that May day. It began long before, in an occupied Poland, in a world that was trying to erase faith from the face of the earth. Karol was born in 1920 in Wadowice, a small town 30 miles south of Krakow. His father was a military officer. His mother died when he was just 9 years old. His older brother died when he was 12. He was left alone with his father, a man of quiet, deep faith who taught him to pray on his knees every night before sleep. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, Karol was 18 years old. He watched friends disappear. He worked in a quarry to avoid being deported. He studied theology in secret, risking his life, because the Nazi regime had shut down the seminary. In 1944, his father died. He was completely alone in the world. It was in that desert of loss that Karol found something unshakable within himself. It was not simply faith, it was a certainty, a conviction that his life had a direction he did not fully control. He was ordained a priest in 1946, a bishop in 1958, and in 1978, at the age of 58, he was elected Pope, the first non-Italian pontiff in 455 years. The world was stunned. He stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and said in imperfect but steady Italian, "Be not afraid." The Poland that Karol Wojtyła knew in his youth was a country that had lost 6 million people during the war, half of them Jewish, half of them Catholic. Cities lay in ruins, families were shattered, and when the Nazis left, the Soviets arrived, bringing with them an ideology that saw religion as the opium of the people and treated priests as enemies of the state. Karol lived for decades under two regimes that tried, by different means, to erase faith from the face of Poland, and the more they tried to erase it, the more it grew. It was in that environment of silent persecution that he developed a conviction he carried for the rest of his life. Faith is not a passive inheritance, it is an active choice that must be renewed every day, especially on the days when everything conspires against it. As Archbishop of Krakow, he became one of the most visible faces of Catholic cultural resistance to the communist regime, not with weapons, with words, with presence, with the ability to gather people around something the state could never fully control. The regime tried to stop him from building churches. He built churches. They tried to silence him. He spoke louder. They tried to isolate him. He traveled.
When he was elected Pope in October 1978, the shock was felt across the globe. But in Warsaw, in Krakow, in the Polish villages where people prayed in secret, there was first a silence, and then tears. One of their own had reached the highest place on earth. No one who knew John Paul II was surprised by his devotion to Our Lady. It was a devotion rooted in childhood, deepened by tragedy, shaped by the experience of war. His episcopal motto, chosen in 1958 and kept until the end of his life, said everything: totus tuus, totally yours, a total consecration to Mary. When he became Pope, He brought this motto to the heart of his pontificate. The letter M for Mary was engraved on his papal coat of arms. He prayed the rosary every day, often in public. He visited Marian shrines across the world. But Fatima held a special place. John Paul II knew the secrets of Fatima deeply. He knew the vision of the bishop dressed in white who walked among ruins, was struck by gunfire and fell. He knew the message of suffering and hope. And there was something in that vision that unsettled him in a way very few people fully understood. On May 13, 1981, at 5:17 p.m., as he moved through St. Peter's Square, John Paul II was 2 meters away from a child reaching out her arms toward him. He leaned down to pick her up. That movement saved his life. Ali Agca, a 23-year-old Turkish gunman positioned in the crowd, fired 2 shots. The first struck the Pope in the abdomen, perforating the intestine at multiple points and destroying the colon. The second grazed his right elbow and left index finger. Had John Paul II not leaned forward at that exact moment, the bullet would have struck the aorta. He would have died there, in that square, within seconds. His personal secretary, Monsignor Stanislaw Divish, was one of the first to reach his side. Cradled in his arms as the vehicle sped toward the ambulance, John Paul II whispered, "Mary, my mother." He did not scream in pain. He did not immediately lose consciousness. His first words were a prayer. The surgery lasted 5 hours and 20 minutes. The surgeons at Rome's Gemelli Hospital worked against time. The blood loss was catastrophic. The intestine had been perforated at 6 separate points. At one moment during the operation, his heart stopped. He was resuscitated. When he woke in the intensive care unit, the first thing he asked for were the documents on Fatima, specifically the Third Secret, revealed to the Vatican decades earlier but never made public. He read it in that hospital room with tubes still attached to his body. And he wept, because he understood that the vision Sister Lucia had described in 1917, the bishop dressed in white, the gunfire, the suffering, was that moment. It was him, in that square, on that day. He would later tell those closest to him, one hand fired the gun, another hand guided the bullet. Ali Agca was seized immediately in the square by an Italian nun named Letizia Giudici, who grabbed his arm before he could flee. In the interrogations that followed, he said something that left investigators deeply unsettled. He said he could not understand how the Pope was still alive. Ali Agca was a professional assassin. He had killed before. He knew exactly what he was doing. He fired from a distance of 20 feet, and yet the shot that should have been fatal had deviated by millimeters from the aorta. Investigators were never able to fully explain the trajectory of the bullet. Medical reports described the path of the projectile as clinically improbable for a shot fired at that distance and angle.
Ali Agca was sentenced to life imprisonment in Italy. The investigation into the assassination attempt lasted years and never reached a definitive conclusion about who was truly behind him. The Turkish gunman had documented ties to far-right extremist groups in Turkey, but the Italian investigation repeatedly pointed toward connections with the Bulgarian Secret Service, and through them, potentially, with the Soviet KGB. The theory became known as the Bulgarian connection and divided investigators, journalists, and historians for decades. The logic was disturbing in its simplicity. John Paul II was Polish. He openly supported the Solidarity trade union, which threatened the stability of the Soviet bloc. His pontificate represented a genuine threat to the established order in Moscow, and the Kremlin had a documented history of eliminating political threats through third parties. But definitive proof never emerged. The Italian trials against Bulgarian citizens accused of involvement in the attack ended in acquittals due to insufficient evidence. Soviet archives opened after the fall of the USSR contained references to the Pope as a strategic threat,
but nothing that directly linked the Kremlin to the trigger pulled on that May 13th. Ali Agca contradicted himself across multiple interrogations. He gave different versions of his motivations, his handlers, his training. In one interrogation, when pressed about why he chose that date, he fell silent for several minutes. Then he said he did not know it was the anniversary of Fatima. Investigators never knew whether to believe that answer. 2 years after the attack, John Paul II went to visit him in prison. They sat face to face for 21 minutes. No one knows exactly what was said. The Pope never fully revealed the contents of that conversation. But when he emerged, John Paul II told journalists, "I spoke with him as one speaks with a brother, whom I have forgiven and in whom I have complete trust." Ali Agca sat in silence for several minutes after the Pope left. Then he asked the guards, "Why did he forgive me?" He never found a satisfying answer to that question. In May 1982, exactly 1 year after the attack, John Paul II traveled to Fatima for the first time as Pope. It was not a diplomatic visit. It was not a state ceremony. It was the pilgrimage of a man who believed he owed his life to Our Lady of Fatima and wanted to give thanks in person. He brought with him the bullet removed from his body during surgery. He handed it to Cardinal Agostinho José d'Almeida, the Bishop of Fatima, with a simple request that it be placed in the crown of the image of Our Lady. Today, anyone who visits the Chapel of Apparitions in Fatima and looks carefully at the golden crown of the image of Our Lady will see that bullet, set in gold among diamonds and precious stones offered by the faithful from every corner of the world. A bullet that should have killed a pope and instead became a relic of survival, of faith, and of gratitude. John Paul II returned to Fatima 2 more times during his pontificate. In 1991, 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which he interpreted as the partial fulfillment of the prophecy concerning the conversion of Russia, and in 2000, the year of the Great Jubilee, when he presided over the beatification of Francisco and Jacinta Marto. On that final visit, the Vatican took the opportunity to reveal the Third Secret of Fatima in its entirety, or at least what it claimed to be its entirety. The text described a vision, a bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father, walking through a city in ruins, passing the bodies of bishops, priests, and lay people, and upon reaching the summit of a steep mountain, being killed by soldiers firing bullets and arrows. The Vatican's official interpretation, signed by the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, linked this vision directly to the 1981 assassination attempt and declared that the prophecy had been fulfilled. But the questions did not go away. Why had Sister Lucia said the secret should be revealed in 1960? Why did the Vatican wait 40 more years? Some theologians and historians point to inconsistencies between the descriptions Lucia had given over the years and the text finally published. And there are those who insist that the bishop in the vision does not die, he is merely struck, which does not correspond exactly to what happened to John Paul II. The mystery outlived the revelation. Sister Lucia, the only surviving seer of Fatima, lived long enough to see the assassination attempt, to see John Paul II's visit to the shrine, to see the revelation of the Third Secret in 2000, and to see the beatification of her cousins, Francisco and Jacinta. She died in February 2005 at the age of 97 in a Carmelite convent in Coimbra, where she had spent decades in prayer and seclusion. She died just 6 weeks before John Paul II. The 2 guardians of the secret of Fatima, the child who had seen the vision in 1917 and the man who had lived its fulfillment in 1981, died within weeks of each other, as though history knew their chapter was complete. Throughout her life, Lucia gave very few interviews and never commented publicly in detail on the connection between her vision and the assassination attempt. But in one of her last documented conversations with trusted confidants, she said something that was recorded in the convent's archives. She said that when she learned the Pope had survived, she prayed in silence for a very long time, and that during that prayer, she felt a certainty she could not put into words, that the bullet had been deflected not by chance, but because there was still much work to be done. John Paul II lived 24 more years after that May 13th. No pope of the 20th century visited as many countries, none met as many world leaders, none spoke to as many crowds. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, which he attributed in part to the intercession of Our Lady of Fatima, happened during his pontificate. The dissolution of the Soviet Union happened during his pontificate. The historic reconciliation between the Catholic Church and the State of Israel happened during his pontificate. 24 years of history that, by his own account, should never have happened. John Paul II died on April 2, 2005, at the age of 84. He died as he had lived, with the full awareness that his life belonged to something greater than himself.
In his personal testament, written and revised over decades, there is a section dedicated to the 1981 assassination attempt. He writes that in that moment, he understood his survival was not a coincidence, that the date, May 13th, the anniversary of Fatima, was not accidental, that the deflection of the bullet could not be explained by medicine alone. And he writes something that has been etched into history. In the solicitude for the whole Church, I feel that these words are particularly addressed to me. He was quoting the words of Our Lady of Fatima on suffering and conversion. He was beatified in 2011 and canonized in 2014, together with John 23, in a historic ceremony in which 2 living popes canonized 2 deceased popes, an absolute first in the history of the Church. One question remains. Ali Agca, after serving part of his sentence in Italy and being extradited to Turkey, was released in 2010. Over the years that followed, he gave numerous interviews in which his statements were contradictory and at times incoherent. But there is one thing he said on multiple occasions in different contexts to journalists from different countries. He said that John Paul II was a supernatural being, not as a compliment, as a statement of fact, as though that prison visit in 1983 had left him with a certainty he could never rationally explain. The man who fired the gun cannot explain how his victim survived, cannot explain the forgiveness he received, and cannot explain the peace he felt in that prison cell during 21 minutes. Some things resist every explanation. In Fatima, the bullet remains in the crown of Our Lady. Millions of pilgrims pass by it every year. Most do not know the story it carries, do not know that this small piece of metal traveled 20 feet across a Roman square, passed through the body of a man who survived against every medical probability, was removed by surgeons during 5 hours of surgery, crossed the Atlantic on a journey of gratitude, and ended up set in gold in a crown in Portugal. From weapon of death to object of faith. That is the journey of certain stories. They begin with violence and end with silence. They begin with a gunshot and end with a prayer. And they remain forever in the crowns of the places where the sacred and the human meet. This has been another episode of Sacred Roots. If this video touched something in you, share it with someone who also searches for these places where history and faith intersect in ways that reason alone cannot fully explain. Subscribe to the channel. In the next episode, we continue this journey through the most extraordinary mysteries of the sacred world. See you then.